Niyaut Tukwalagwet Buck Disam. Niyaut Tukwalagwet Buck Disam. Thank you very much for logging into my blog, vlog, whatever you want to call it, the Lone Wolf Niyaut Dick Bukwalagwet Disam. Oh my god, I'm gonna get it. I promise. Awesome, awesome. So, we are heading to Yarmouth for the weekend. Me, Nevi. Say hi, Nevi. Yeah, that's the most that you're gonna get from her. Good old times, good old times. Except, Juno, you're coming too. You're coming. You gotta get out of the front. Come on. Come on. No, it's not working. Come on, Juno. You're coming with us. Let's go. Hey everyone, this is Natil coming to you in 3D, starting up my first vlog, so thank you for tuning in. Sorry. I decided to call this path that I'm going on the Lone Wolf Path, which in Mi'kmaq means Niyaut Tukwalagwet Buck Disam. Again, Niyaut Tukwalagwet Buck Disam. Thank you to Garland for teaching me that. Yeah, so to just do my first little video, I just wanted to talk about some of the biggest issues that I had from being a born off reserve native to living the majority of my life on reserve to then having to adjust to going off reserve once again. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, but my mom moved us to Canada in the 2000s, and we moved to Yarmouth 2001. So I was about 9 years old. So Yarmouth is pretty much all I can remember when it comes to living type thing, growing up in a home and stuff like that. We did move around the reserve quite a bit, well, 2 houses, from a trailer to a house. But for the most part, I've been, I'm from Yarmouth. Yeah, weird to say that. Acadian First Nation. Woo-woo. On our way to Yarmouth! Yay! My road dog. My little road dog. Here, I'll put your window down a little. So it's going to take us about 3 hours to get to Yarmouth. I'm heading down by myself with Nevelyn and Juno. My friend Emily and her boyfriend's coming, Friedel, and Robert's coming, and then my sisters, well, some of them will be there. It will be a good weekend, just family. Yeah, so just to kind of highlight some of the stuff that, like, you hear people say when, one, you say that you're from a reserve, is the first thing someone says to you is, oh, you're from a reserve, so you have status, right? So you can travel back and forth to the U.S. You don't have to pay for your house. Your education was paid for. Oh, you don't pay taxes on cars? Oh, you get free stuff. And aren't you guys, like, all related to each other? Like, so, yeah. I've heard it all, and really, it's always a smile and a nod. No, but I'm not going into this conversation with you type deal. But now I'm more open. The first couple years of living off the reserve, it's a blur. It really is a blur. From going from a place where it was my home, and it was my place away from the world. I'd go to school. I'd deal with racism at school. I'd deal with racism at work. I would deal with all these places. But then once I got home to the reserve, it was kind of like you turned it all off. My family was there. My cousins were there. If anything really hit the fan, my family was there instantly. So to say the reserve was my safe place, and it was really confusing growing up knowing that the reserve was my safe place, but to other people it was a dangerous place. I guess when you're in the reserve, you kind of become accustomed to the things that are going on the reserve. where you don't see it as bad. Like it's really sucks to say, but it's like you would hear people drinking, overdosing, people going missing, suicide, fights, all this stuff. And it was like gossip instead of actually taking it serious. Like, okay, we need to do something because our reserve is dying, our people are dying. But you become accustomed to it. You mind your own business when it doesn't involve you. But you still have fun. Like, I still had fun on the reserve despite everything that everyone threw at me, what my classmates threw at me and stuff like that. It was that was my life. I'm proud to be from Acadia First Nation. Is it just me, or when everyone is, or anyone is heading home, even if it's for a day or two or something like that, you have to do a million errands for everyone else before you even get on the highway? I left my house at 12. It is 2:30 and I am officially just getting on the highway to head to Yarmouth. You want me to kill it, sweet as a acapella, like ooh. As I love, I pretend they don't see us, yeah. You as I love, make you feel like you can't live without the only one. Alone in your heart. You ain't nobody else's. Nobody else's. Day that my grandmother actually looked me in the eyes and she had told me, like, hey, Dabadat, you gotta leave. You gotta go somewhere. You have to make something of your life. You have to get away from here. Go to school. Get your education. My mom would say it to me all the time too. Yeah, you have to leave. You have to... Going to school is the right thing. So in 2010, when I graduated from high school, I just picked a university. Not even putting much thought into it. I didn't want a huge university because I didn't want to deal with that social anxiety of being in a class of 200, 300 people. But I wanted something where maybe it could feel connected. So I picked St. Mary's University. I lived on residence for the first 2 years, and I would say the first year I was still very much connected to home. I was going home any chance that I could. I hung out with everyone from Yarmouth. I met some people who are still family to me to this day. However, in my first year, it was kind of like that first year, woo, party, all this. Life didn't really hit me until the second year. The second year was a division. I was actually being divided up. I felt the divide between being recognized as an on-reserve native to an off-reserve native. And from there that's when all my soul searching. So in part to this vlog, I did write a blog and I titled it as From On Reserve to Off Reserve. I highlighted 5 key points of, not key points, but topic starters of what it was like through my transition. Now I'm still transitioning. I'm still very much just trying to figure out myself. I'm trying to figure out my where I kind of fit, what am I good at, all that type of stuff. number one on my list was it was a loss of identity. When you move off the reserve and you move into kind of society, you're completely lost. To my native counterparts, I am very much black. To my black counterparts, I'm very much native. And when it comes to anyone else in between any other race, it really depends on what type of context we're in when it comes to who am I showing face of. There's not really that many opportunities when I have the chance to be both of who I am, both a strong native woman and a strong black woman. Because when it comes to who my audience is or who my crowd is, very little do we ever identify two. We think of one. So that was the biggest thing for me was I had to learn how to interchange my identity based on who was sitting in front of me. Most of my friends, even when I lived in Yarmouth, most of my friends were international students. And it's because there was a similarity between us where I felt like we could relate. They were coming to Canada for the first time. They were leaving their family behind. They were coming here on their own. They were really trying to find themselves in a whole new world. And that's how it felt when you move off the reserve, is you're stepping into a world where you're really just a member of society. You're not a member of a community, you're a member of a society at whole. So that was my very first point, I lost myself. I lost who am I. And maybe I never knew who I was, but when you lose something, you feel it. And I lost my identity when I first moved off the reserve. So this is like typical. I come to Yarmouth, I go visit, then I come back to an empty house. You know, just me and my girls, my dog, and Nebby. Hi, Nebby. That's about it. So we're just going to turn on the music, jam a little bit. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Yep. It's gonna be a good time. Just us until bedtime. Another important point, which was number 2, is actually, I titled it as a familiar background, but complete strangers. I learned very quickly, just living off the reserve, that if I was to run into another native, or if I was to run into another black person, we were strangers to each other. We share a history that is very similar. We share a struggle that is very similar, but we're strangers. And I should have known that it was going to be hard to meet other Native people, because one, it's hard to know who identifies as Native, because not a lot of people stand up and say, I'm Native. I actually hear more so people saying, I am Native, but I don't really blah, 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 blah. But when it comes to kind of meeting Native people, it's reserves never interacted with each other, so it's really hard to think that if there's another lone wolf that's venturing away from her reserve, if she's having trouble with interacting with her own reserve, she's going to have trouble interacting with other people. And that's exactly where I was at. I would see people, we would be doing some great things business-wise, or we'd be in a class together, and then we were complete strangers once that class ended. But I always knew, even if we don't speak, we're similar. We have the same background. We're strangers, but We have the same background. We have the same pain. So I literally just said the other day that I haven't walked the reserve in years. Like, I'm going to say like 15 years. This is
That's a long time.
That's a long time. We got Swift Boy.
Said Swift Boy.
Swift Boy in the house. We got Freddie Skybro back there.
My boy look terrible.
We got M Call in the back.
Your vlog games are terrible.
And then
we got Junie to the right.
And we got June.
Trying to fit into the cage.
Yeah.
Where we're headed though. We gotta tell the folks where we're headed.
Oh, we're heading to the convenience store.
What's that noise?
That's probably Mozart.
The dog named Mozart?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Mozart's a...
The dog's name is Mozart?
Yeah.
Oh, the little one.
Hey, everybody, meet Nevi. She just woke up from a nap, so we're gonna go get her pictures done soon. So I'm really excited. She looks so cute. You look so cute.
I know, but that old score we talked.
The dog is going crazy. So the third point that I wanted to make was there's a fear of education. Now, education was something that you take for granted within anyone. We took elementary school for granted. We took high school for granted. And perhaps I even took university for granted. Now that I'm looking back and I'm a lot older now, I know that I would have been more serious about my grades and the material that was being presented in front of me. However, it's inevitable. Blah, blah, blah. It's very important. It's very important to know that education, especially within the reserves and the native culture, is huge. But it's tricky because school has never been something that has always been fair to my elders and my ancestors that have passed long before I was here. Education was colonization in a sense. So now when you're on reserve and you're transitioning to being off reserve, education in a sense it's important because it then unlocks the potential in your mind of what do I like? I did psychology in university because I realized that I like the brain. I like how it works. I like knowing a person inside and out. Like I like knowing how other people could feel, how certain situations make people feel. But then I also used that degree to help me understand myself more. I mean, right away, I'd talk to people and they'd be like, don't use your psychology stuff on me. And it's like, that's not what I'm learning. I'm learning development. I'm learning how the brain develops. I'm learning how we learn. I'm learning different parts of the brain and different emotions and different reactions in the brain, what causes what. And that was really important to me, especially being away. I have a really noisy dog, by the way. But then that also made it so school, in a sense, and learning, like it's fearful because of the history that comes behind colonization and what they have done to our elders in the educational system. But at the same time, all this information is brand new. There's no person ahead of me that can relate to what education I'm putting or I'm going for or what I'm striving for. There's no one that I can say like, hey, my mom graduated, my grandmother graduated. There's none of that in my family chain. So being the first to do it, and then being the first to do it alone as a lone wolf, leaving the reserve, that's pretty hard. And I understand why. I understand the struggle. Yes, our reserves can pay for our education. Not everyone's guaranteed, but I understand why that opportunity isn't being taken. It's pretty much being taken for granted because it's scary. You're going into a whole new world where you can't ask anyone for advice or anyone for help. You have to find those people along your journey. And to even start that journey by yourself, it's lonely and it's scary, and you don't even know what you like or what's even out there for you. So to jump right into school is hard. But I learned throughout the years that education isn't just textbook. It's street smart. It's knowing your body. It's knowing your soul. It's knowing being in tune with yourself and being in tune with others. That's all stuff that you learn, and you have to have the drive for it. And that's really important. It was really hard. It was extremely hard. But I pray that education won't be a fear for my children and my children's children. I hope that I at least tweak that generational curse, that we don't run from the educational system, that we use it to our advantage, even though it's extremely hard. It's extremely hard.
Nice. They're really nice.
But it's just the sad part of it is like they live their whole life in it, and it's like they never own it.
Yeah.
It's like they
Because the government gives it to them. They give it to them.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Okay.
It's crazy though. You take someone's land and then you just
there's no
you don't give it back to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Or let them buy it.
And like you said, and it makes it possible to have to actually buy the land.
Yeah. And it's like buying the land is one thing, but then what are you allowed to do on that land is a whole other thing. Like you then have to go through more paperwork to then be able to put a business on this land and stuff like that. Be able to like operate it. So,
Yeah.
but it's a beautiful.
Bingo office.
That's the bingo.
Wall.
That's the band office.
Which one? The one that's under
The blue one.
the blue one. Okay.
The health center. I had my first job at the health center when I was like 13 years old. I was a
Health center?
reception.
What were you doing?
I was a receptionist.
At 13 years old.
Yeah, I was answering the phone calls, telling everyone they're out of the office. 'Cause,
I see your Frenchies.
yeah, the band doesn't own it. You know what's crazy though? When I used to order food, if it's delivered to the reserve, it's tax-free. So people used to make us meet up at Frenchie's to come get our food, so then they could charge us the tax.
Wow,
So it's
that's
like
crazy.
you'd order a pizza and they wouldn't come down the reserve just so they could have 15% tax.
So can we order a pizza tonight? Okay, you might be all this good food, but
I know. Learning to not look back. And like I said, I mean this with the utmost respect to my reservation because that's my home. That's all I know. That's my family. And I always felt like, I've always thought about like, maybe I should move home. But then again, the wait list for a house is like years. So where am I even going to live? I'm going to move back with my mom, and I have a child now, and things. It just doesn't work that way. Plus, in Yarmouth, I wouldn't feel like I'd be growing in the town of Yarmouth. It has nothing to do with my reserve, but it has everything to do with the town. And that's because I had to let it go. And when you have to let something go, the thought of having to pick it back up it's scary, and it's unknown. It's there's pain affiliated with it, and so I had to learn to not look back. And in a sense, the biggest reason why I chose the life to not look back is because I've made a promise, and rest in peace, my grandmother. But I made a promise to her that I was going to leave. I was going to make something of myself. I was going to shift the dynamic of my family, and I was going to be able to open doors for my generation that is to come, that the government closed on our family in a sense. But learning not to look back is probably the hardest thing. And every time I do look back, every time I go visit, I hear of a story. I see depression. I see oppression. I see addiction. I see all these things that when you're a kid, they were very minor things. But now that you're off the reserve, and when you go back to the reserve, you want to be able to help everyone, but the heart can only handle so much. So learning to not look back was to learn how to look forward. Yeah.
That's Fidelia. Don't disrespect it because they'll go crazy. Don't disrespect it because they'll go crazy.
Why? Do you see the mask on her? She almost like she's the most.
All right, they're gonna have some drawers for the door
Fantastic
prize.
Mr. Fox. Ah, that's exactly what I was thinking of.
How often does this feast happen?
Once a year.
Once a year? How many times you been here?
Once now. They've been doing it for 15 years. My mom actually started it when she was working for the band.
Your mom started the feast?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It's been going on for 15 years. I probably came to like 5 of them, but then I moved away.
Yeah.
So
So where do we go to get the free food? It's a feast, right? So
over there, I think, or in there. I'm going inside to see a bunch of roses and stuff.
oh, yeah, it's a feast for real. How you doing, Emily?
I'm good.
How you doing, Fidel? Welcome to Natiel's vlog. You know, this might be the intro. It might not be the intro. Who knows what the intro will be? First vlog episode. Do you call vlog episodes? Or how do you introduce a vlog?
Yeah, you can call it an episode.
Do you? Or did it say
I'm pretty sure
vlog
it's
one,
like
two?
vlog
The
1 and
ones I
2.
watch, they have episodes and they have numbers on their episodes.
Don't drop no names because it's our
That's
vlog.
what I said.
Yeah, smart girl.
Right?
I mean, I think it's better if you drop all the names.
No, we don't want
Why?
to. For Natil
Clout?
to get
Cap?
Hey,
To learn not to look back was to look forward. And I mean, I'm looking forward with my family from the reserve. I'm looking forward with my community. I'm looking forward as a Native woman, as a Native mother. I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward and I'm stepping forward. But I struggle. It sucks when you see alcohol completely mask someone's beautiful personality. That was bugging me, sorry. But yeah. My biggest fear is to be out here off reserve and exercise all options where I then have to then depend on the government again. And after everything that the government has done to my ancestors and to the elders in my family, I want to be able to operate without them. And I want to make sure that my kids can operate without them. Because I strongly believe that when you operate on the government or off the government, it's an oppression. Whether it's you're living on welfare and public housing or things like that, you don't want to take those steps forward anymore because you then become comfortable with what the government is providing to you. And I never want to be comfortable. I want to be able to use this life to really create a shift for the people in my family. whether it's physical, spiritual, mental, or financially. But to do that, I had to learn to not look back. Not to look back is because every time that you do, there's pain there. There's pain in the upbringing of the elders. There's pain in the eyes of the children of those elders. My uncles, my mom, my brothers, my sisters, cousins. There's pain, and the pain was afflicted onto them. Not pain that comes from internally. This is pain that's been inflicted onto us, and it's being passed down. I read this article one time, and it had to do with the study of, they had 2 mice, and they actually inflicted a fear into one of the mice, and it was like a sound or something like that, and eventually every time the sound came on, the mouse would get scared. It would get zapped, thus creating a fear of that sound, because every time that sound went off, it thought it was going to get zapped. Then what they did is they mated those mice, and then they introduced that same sound to both of the litters of mice, and they found that the one that they were zapping, the one that developed that fear of that sound, had passed that fear down to the children. And just to think of that is the systematic failure that the government wanted the Native people to have by attacking the child, and our elders to attack a child and to strip them of their identity and to force them to ultimately forget who they are, to conform to who the government wanted them to be. That fear and that pain is passed down, and we don't understand it within ourselves. I was sitting and I was speaking to an elder who was talking to me about how she went to a boarding school in, I think it was not Birchtown, but Clare, around that area in Nova Scotia. And she said, I started seeing counseling, and I was very proud of her, but she looked at me and she's like, never in my years did I understand what I was feeling was called post-traumatic depression. She was living with the depression and the anxiety and the pain within herself, not able to identify it. And the biggest thing when it comes to being conscious in this world is you have to bring it to light. But how do you bring it to light if you have no understanding of what it is or where it came from? So that's the pain that you grow to be aware of as children. You don't grow to understand it, but you grow to be aware of it. And when it comes to leaving the reserve and entering into the world, people are just kind of realizing this, and it does hurt, it sucks, and all these things mixed together when you're looking at a classroom and no one understands the pain that the Native people are going through in today's world, in today's society. This isn't something that happened 300, 400, 500 years ago. The last residential school in Nova Scotia actually closed its doors in 1997. That's the year that my little sister was born. So when you think of that, that's new, that's fresh. There's people walking on today's soil who have been beat and raped and stripped of their identity and then forced to feel some type of relief with alcohol. And that's the reality of natives in today's society, is we are just becoming aware that this pain travels. And the government knew this a step ahead of us, because that's why they attacked children. That's why they took children and they put them in the residential schools. They took them from their families. They didn't do anything with the parents. If you look at the history, there's barely any mention of education relief for parents. It's let's help your children so then they can function better in today's society. But the society's messed up. So you mean to tell me that before living on the reserve, you had to go to a special school to be able to operate off the reserve? Now, that's gone, thank goodness. But there still has to be some type of preparation to move you off the reserve. But there needs to be preparation to keep you on the reserve as well. There needs to be some type of curriculum, some better education, not just teaching people what happened to the natives, but the mental aspect of it needs to be taught. It needs to be, coping mechanisms need to be learned when it comes to learning this. I remember the first day I actually learned about natives in a classroom setting. It was in university in my final year, and I cried. I didn't understand it. I cried and I cried, and I called my grandmother, I called my mom, I called everyone. There was just so much pain that was just instantly brought up, and I was like, wow, we're passing this pain off because we don't know the pain. We don't recognize that this is pain within us that was inflicted on us, and it's crazy. So as I'm learning to be a strong native and a strong black woman, because I am both, I am not two separate entities, I am one. I'm going to keep walking. I'm going to keep pushing forward, and I'm going to teach others. I'm going to share that dialogue, and this is the whole meaning behind all of this, is to open that dialogue. Let's start talking about this. Yes, we're struggling on the reserve, but when our lone wolves are being identified and they're walking off that reserve to try to create a dynamic shift and break that generational curse, they need support just as well. And this is a huge topic and a huge deal, and I am completely open to talk about it, but that's because I've went through it.
Go clutch the girls again.
Yeah, grab it back around here.
There we go. Look up. You see his Nebby? Nebby's like, oh. Nebby, I thought I was going to at least you growing some balls on you now. Or you're a female dog, so you actually got it.
Come on,
You were walking loose, you don't bark.
Now look at this one.
Why not do that?
That lost huge.
Oh, it's snapping! Yeah!
You have to do these?
Out to eat with the fam jam. Oh God. Nevy's not impressed. Just out for a walk. Nevy's over it. She's like, I just want to be inside. That's why happens when you bring a city girl. Stray dogs. It's an army of them. Until I bring Juno out, then it's on. September 30th. Wear orange for awareness and honoring of the survivors of the residential schools. So every child matters. My one goal, if I could take everything I've learned on how to adjust of being an off-reserve native, when being prior to being a non-reserve native, or whatever I'm trying to say. You know what I'm trying to say, right? Okay. I would love to actually learn how to take the investment of what the government gives Native communities and turn it into a profit, so then we're not dependent on the government anymore. That would be my number one goal, is if I can take all the education that I'm learning off the reserve, bring it back to the reserve, and somehow work with the community so then we can build our own empire. So then we're not products of the government anymore. We're making a product of the government. Let's learn how to use the government funding as an investment to further our community, teach our people what was taken away from them, and live moving forward where we're not at the bottom anymore. That would be my number one goal. So if I can't do it, I hope generations down my line can do that. Thank you for watching my podcast. Not my podcast. Thank you for watching my vlog. Is there a big difference between a podcast and a vlog? Because I don't really know the difference. But thank you for watching this video log. I don't know how to do a G anymore. Sorry. Thanks. And I hope you guys liked it. And I hope I can spark some good conversations and things like that. So yeah, stay tuned. This Niaut de Gualagwet buck disum. Niaut de Gualagwet buck disum. Niaut de Gualagwet buck disum. I want to learn this. Niaut de Gualagwet buck disum. Niaut de Gualagwet buck disum.